All right, and we're back. It's COMP305. It's week 9, lesson 9, part 1. And what I'd like you to do is let's talk about where we last left off. Now, what you guys got going on right now is if we look at, you don't have to take off, you can stick around, right? Let's take a look at our GitHub. So we're on GitHub/Centennial College. And if you look underneath FPS Demo Section 1, that's where we are today, right? So that's the where we're going to continue from. I'm going to add to some assets today, but let's take a look and see where we're at in terms of our lesson. Okay, so first things first, let's just bring up Unity. So, and by the way, I was saying in this morning's class how Unity has updated, so you may have to update your Unity to the latest version if you want to keep up. And they're going to continue to keep up with these little incremental updates until December. Right? So it's going to compile some scripts, and this is what we got going on. So if you notice, let me just show you what I've got here. Yours, for section 1, I've got some slightly different stuff going on than for section 2. Obviously, it's a little bit different, but if you notice how I've got this, what looks like a target, right? And what I'm doing is, as I'm aiming, I'm going to see the target. So let's take a look and see what we see. So let's see what we got so far. There's my gun, right? And you see the reticule in the middle, right? I still got the whole walking sequence, right? So there we go, turning around, all this kind of stuff. What I want to get to the point is we need to do some basic animation today. Set up the animation sequence, the animator, and let's take a look at that animator right now. Right now I have, take a look at layers. That's good. I only have one layer. I'm going to stick to one layer. I was trying it with 2 layers before, but I think that was just more complicated. So what I got is this gun aim animation, right, which I've kind of done already, and I've gone this gun idle. So if you can please download the GitHub format of this one, right, so we can do this piece, right. There's some animation to get us to the gun aim, right, and the gun idle. And if I'm not wrong, what we need now, if I was to look at the animations, is I got gun aim and gun idle. I need one more animation, and I kind of did this last day in class for section 2, but I'll have to do it for you guys. Let's go into if I click on my gun, which is if I take my player camera, my gun camera, and I look at my gun itself, right? When I click onto this, and if I click on animation, right, for the gun, because that's the AK rifle that I've got right now, right? So there's my AK rifle. And if you notice, I've got a couple of animations. I've got gun aim and gun idle. I need one more, right? I need gun fire, right? So how do I do that? First of all, if I was to look at the gun aim would come up. Like it basically moves the gun to the middle of my screen when I click the aim. The gun fire, all it needs to do is it needs to shake the gun a little bit. So if Vanessa's running down, with her gun and she fires the gun, it's going to shake the gun a little bit like this, just kind of on the side, and I'll show you guys what that looks like, and then back. So how do I do that? So first things first, I want to create another animation. So I'm going to go here to create new clip, all right, and here's my animation. It's going to go in animations, and I'm going to call this thing gun fire. That's what it's going to be called, right? So I'm going to save into animations, right, and there we go. My gunfire animation, I want to add a couple properties. I want to track a couple of properties here. And the thing is, what I wanted to do is I want to track, I'm going to go from here. I'm going to move this, first of all I'm going to zoom in. And if you zoom in to this piece here, if you notice, I can zoom in as much as I want. And it's useful because that way, as you zoom in, you can see that there's different frames. I want to go to frame 5. So I want to move the playhead, which is here, the red bar here. I want to move the playhead from here. I want to move this all the way to here. Right? So that's the first thing I want to do. The next thing is I'm moving my gun. Right? That's what the whole thing is about here. And what I want to do is when I do this animation piece, I want to be able to see what I'm doing. So this is a terrible view for me to see this. Now the good thing is, if you notice, it created automatically my gun fire clip inside my animations folder. That's good, but it doesn't really do what I want it to do. So I'm going to undo that, stop recording, and let's kill this gun fire clip for a second. I'm just going to delete it one more time. There we go. If I go to my animator, this gun fighter, I got to also click, I delete this one because it just automatically drops it in there. And I want to switch views. So I've got two layouts. Right now, I got this layout that I'm looking at, which is my FPS layout. So let's go to that one. This is my FPS layout. And what this does is it aligns my gun and everything else in a certain pattern. If I start playing, right, I can see that I'm aligned up. My gun is fitting in a certain way, right? Then I want to switch from FPS layout. I got another layout that I call testing layout. And all I've done is rearrange the windows so I can see both the scene view on the left and the game view on the right. So I can use my game view to help me set up my scene view, all right? So when I click my gun, this is the one I need, right? On the bottom here, I have my hierarchy. So I want to kind of go into player, player camera, gun camera, my rifle. And on this side, I want to kind of press F to kind of get into that proper position and zoom in so I can see my gun. Now this is important for me to do because in order for me to set up my gun so it's in the right place, I'm going to use this view here, right, to move my gun in place when I do my animations. So first I got to go to my animation window, and if you notice here, I'm on my gun, right? So I'm focusing on my gun, going back to my hierarchy, my AK rifle, right there it is. And if you look at my animator, I've got, if I pull this up for a second, you see that I've got only my gun aim and my gun idle. I need to create my gun, another animation, which I don't have in here, called gun fire. Right, like I said. So let's create this thing. So it says to begin animating AK rifle, create an animation clip. So we'll create one. And if you notice here, I want to call it something else. So I want to kind of go to create new clip, like we did before, and I want to change this to gun fire. Gun fire. And it's going to go, instead of assets, that's not the right place for it to go. It's got to go in animations. Right, there it is. So I'm going to save. Okay, cool. I'm not recording anything yet. You see, it's the recording head is there. I want to move my recording head, like I said, to 5 frames. And this time I want to record a couple of properties. I want to only move my rotation and my position, but not my scale. And sometimes when you move things around on the screen, sometimes the scale shifts around too, which messes you up. So let's add those two properties in. So I'm going to add property, and I can go transform position. I definitely want to add that in. So click plus. Add property, right, transform, rotation. So I want that. So rotation and position are kind of marked here, like the standard position. And then by frame 5, I want this gun to shift around, right? So let me show you how that looks. So I want it to kind of, the whole gun itself is going to rotate and again, if you notice, the y-axis is the top, right? I don't mind doing that. What it's going to do is it's going to pull up on the y-axis just a touch, just a little bit, right? So it's going to, basically, as the gun firing straight, the gun axis is going to pull up on the y-axis. So let's do that. So how do I do that? I have to change my buttons from manipulate to rotate, right? And I'm going to rotate across the x-axis here. So I want to go like one of these. I'm going to kind of rotate the gun up. So it's kind of moving just a touch up. So basically, when you fire, it's going to go bang, right? The gun is going to move up, okay? That's number one. The other thing what I want to do is I want to rotate it to the side like this. So kind of to the side, because when you rotate, it's kind of a heavy gun. It's going to go bang, bang, right? And not a lot. So again, I would kind of take this one and then rotate it a little bit to the right like this. Okay. Now the other thing I want to do is move my position. So I've kind of changed if you notice my rotation has changed. That's the only thing that's changed. My position stays fixed. I want to move my position just a touch to the right. A touch, just a touch, like we're talking a hair, right? Just to see that there's a bit of pull and up and to the right. So I'm going to kind of move this, grab my arrow and move it to the side just a little bit. Like we're talking fractions of a unit, right? So what is this animation going to do? Well, let's save the animation. Here's my animation. So what it looks like if I scrub the line, so I can show you, it goes like this. It goes bang, 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 right? So almost like whenever time I fire, it kind of moves the gun this way, like just like as if it's firing, right? So it gives me that little bit of, idea of how it's firing. Okay, good. So I've got that animation. Let me go into my animator and see what I've got. And if you notice, I've got gun fire down here, and I'm going to put this gun fire on this side. So I did it kind of a little differently with the other class, but that's okay. So, and I've got one property called aim. I want to add another property here, which we're going to make a trigger. So I'm going to add a property, trigger. right? And the trigger property is going to be called fire, right? It's going to start off untriggered, obviously, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say from gun idle, I'm going to be able to fire, right? And I can't fire though, like from aim, right? I can fire, but it's not gonna play the fire animation, right? I'll fire the gun and you'll hear the gun fire, but it won't shake as much. Like the whole thing won't shake as much because it's a different animation that I would need compared to what I'm doing here. So I'm gonna make another transition from here. So make a transition from the idle state to the fire state. So it's gonna show the gun firing, right? And I'm going to make a transition from the fire state back to the idle state. So that's the transition that's going to be there. Okay, now I can't fix these transitions. I'm going to do that, but I'm going to do that in another view, right? So let's go back to, first of all, save my scene, and I'll go back from a testing view. I'm going to go back to my FPS view. So there's my FPS view. Again, it's just another view that I've set up. And what I want to do is I want to look at that animator again. So I'm going to click on my my player camera, gun camera, AK rifle, and you can see that this is the animator, the animator controller, right, for this thing. And what it's doing right now is it's moving from gun idle to gun aim. And when I move to gun idle, from gun idle to gun aim, I notice that it has an exit time. I don't want it to have exit time. That just means it'll finish playing and then it'll do its animate. It'll move from one animation state to the next. So that's got to go. Same thing on the way back. So from gun aim back to here, that exit time has got to go. We always try and remove exit time unless you want to wait to finish for the animation to play. All right? All right, the next one is from my gun idle to my gun fire, right? I don't have a condition, and I definitely don't want to have exit time. So what I want to do is I want to say that, well, you know what, trigger it. So I'm going to say from here, I want to say fire the gun. So fire the gun. Now on the way back, though, I do want to have an exit time. I don't want to have anything to trigger it back. It only triggers one time. So it fires the gun, it does its animation, and then it goes back by itself. Now the challenge is for me, I've got to reduce some of these animations because they're a little bit hairy, eh? Like some of this stuff it's really tight. So what I want to do is, this is the blend mode for the animator, right? So as we're transitioning from gun idle into gun fire, it's moving from the idle state to the gun fire state. If it's really slow, like right now it's happening over a 5-frame period, it's really kind of slow. I want to speed this up a little bit. And in order to do this, I'm going to pull this piece back as much as I can, close to the beginning of the animation, as well as this one. So I'm going to kind of tighten this up a little bit. And what this is going to do is going to create a very tight, animation from gun idle to gun fire. Same thing on the way back. So on the way back, we'll move from gun fire to gun idle. So it's going to be, we want to kind of make that kind of go back. And I'm going to pull this blend mode as tight as possible, so it's not a long blend. It's going to go from gun fire to gun idle, right? Same thing with gun aim. From gun aim, this is like, look how long that is. It's like huge. So from gun aim, I'm going to kind of bring this in a little bit, right? From gun aim to, from gun idle to gun aim, and from gun aim to gun idle, same thing. This is pretty tight already, and some things to note here. You notice that there's a bunch of different ones. This is the duration of the blend, and this is where the animation starts. I still want it to start from the beginning, but I want my blend to be super tight. So it doesn't take long for it to go from gun aim to gun idle to gun aim. All right. So again, it goes from gun idle to gun aim. It goes when aim is true. That's the actual Boolean value we set here in the Mecanum animator, right? From gun aim to gun idle, that transition happens when my aim is false. So I turn aim off, right? From gun idle to gun fire, right now, I'm moving from, I just trigger the fire trigger, and from gun fire back to gun idle, I just let it have the exit time. So I let it finish its animation, which is just going to come back. One thing we don't want is for any of these animations to loop. And if you notice, here I have my AK rifle, my gun aim, gun fire, and gun idle all in the same animations folder. I want to create another folder in here, so I'm going to right click, I'm going to create a new folder called clips. And let's make another folder called controllers, because you know what, I want to kind of put my clips, all these clips right here, I want to put them inside my clips and my AK rifle controller in my controllers folder, just for organizational purposes, so I don't mix those up. So if I look at my clips now, right, I have to make sure when I click on my clip that there's no loop time. Loop time means it'll play it over and over again. So that's got to be turned off. So this is off. Same thing with gunfire. Same thing with gun aim. There's no loop time. That's got to be turned right off. That's important. Okay, let's check this out and see if, first of all, we have to make sure that gun idle is the default animation. So let's turn that on. And again, you notice it doesn't play anything. And I got my reticule kind of in the middle, right? And there it is, right? So my reticule is in the middle. So no matter where I'm looking, I can see that I'm looking right and left. And I've got my reticule in the middle. So if I run, and by the way, walking is like this. If I press Shift with my default character controller and press W, then I'm running, right? So I can run and walk, right? I can jump, right? There we go. So it's kind of, I'm a powerful jumper, right? I'm a Superman if I can jump this part. But I can also fall, right? So here we go. So let's just fall down. Boom. Okay. So that works, and there's no ill effects on what we've done. Now we've got to set up this stuff. But in order for me to set this up, I'm going to do some updates. So first of all, in order for me to update what I've got here to GitHub, so you have what I just have, you'll have my animations and everything else, I need to shut down Unity. So first I'm going to save my scene, then I'm going to save my project, then I'm going to quit Unity. And when I do that, it's going to save everything, close all my files off so I don't have redundant files. And I'm going to go into my terminal, and I'm going to go to my Unity project, so desktop Unity, and I believe it's FPS demo section 1, right? And then I'm going to say git add dot for adding everything, git commit -m, and we'll say updated Animator Controller, which is what I did. And then git push origin master. So that's the first piece that I kind of did that with the other class ahead of time, like last week, but I didn't finish that with you guys because we ran into a few issues. So that's one of the things I did. The next piece I need to do is I need to add in some more assets that I'm going to share with you. I want a muzzle flash, right? So when I fire my gun, I want this flash to happen. And then I also want something called an impact. Who knows what an impact is? So there are actually two particle systems I'm adding in. So one particle system is a muzzle flash, and the other one is an impact. What do you think the impact is?
I guess when you shoot something.
Yeah?
So with the animation or that effect
when I'm hitting something. So when I hit something, there's going to be a particle effect. Now, imagine you're not making the particle effects here. Particle effects really are an advanced topic that we probably would handle sometime in game programming too, if I was going to do it, right? But for you guys, I want you to be able to use particle effects. If someone wants to give you a particle effect, right, and to incorporate it, I want you to use it, right? So I'm going to give them to you. I'm going to give them I'm going to give you some more assets, all right? I've already given you some assets for the gun and all that stuff. I'm going to give you some more assets now for the other effects. So in order for me to do that, I'm going to pull up my courses here, and let's bring up one more time another window. And what I'm going to do is inside my Unity projects, right? Here's my Unity projects. I have another little demo that I use for test particles, and I have this thing called Fps Effects that I'm going to transfer over. So I'm going to go back into desktop, and now this is a pretty big, kind of bunch of assets here. So when I give them to you, it's going to take a bit to download. So I'm just go to Unity projects, and I'm going to open up for section 1, FPS demo section 1, and in assets, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this into imported assets. I'm going to move this this file here. So I'm going to copy this thing, and I just didn't do that in one blow last time, and paste. So when I do that, I'm going to paste all these Unity assets in from the FPS effects. Now when I do that, the good thing is when I go back to Unity, right, and I've got to open up Unity for us to do this. Let me open up Unity so I can convert everything, and then I'll upload it to you guys. So here I am opening up Unity for section 1. It's going to look at the files, right, and try and import all the assets that it can see, right? So it's importing any new assets that it sees inside of its thing there. Now it's going to take quite a bit of time to do all this stuff because these assets are pretty big, right? But I'm going to do all the importing and everything for us. I want you to note that when Unity imports everything, it actually creates additional materials and textures and all that kind of stuff that are required when you import a package, right? This package is a pay-for package, so something that I want you to use but not sell. Okay, this is not something that you can use to make your own games to sell on the on some iOS store or something like that. This is for learning purposes only that we're going to use it, and I'm sharing this with you so that we can have all the similar effects from a learning perspective. That's what it's for. Okay. Okay, so this is under imported assets, and just to show you what you get with it. Now that I've done, I'm going to save it and I'm upload it to GitHub. Under FPS assets, I've got a couple things. You're going to get some impacts, right? There's a metal impact. There's some water impacts, things that make it look like you're hitting water or metal or whatever. You're also going to get some different particle systems, some explosions, other kinds of dirt impacts and bullet impacts and weapon effects, which are going to be these muzzle flashes and everything else. These are the things that you're going to be getting for this particular project. Okay, so let me update this. I'm just going to save file, save scene from the file, save project, and then I'm going to close Unity again and upload to GitHub. So I'm going to go back into terminal. And I'm going to say git add dot, and if you notice how long it's taking, right? It's taking a lot to add all those things to, there's lots of files, and then I'll go git commit -m, and I'll say added, FPS Effects assets, right? Lots of them. Git push origin master. Now this is, I'll be honest with you, something in the realm when we finish off this, it'll be like 500 megs for this particular project together, right? That's like half a gig, right? So now I'm giving you quite a few assets. There's going to be some muzzle flashes. There's going to be some, like I said, some other things. It's going to take some time to pull everything up, but once it goes up, the great thing is we'll have everything you need to make your game, your project for assignment number 2. You'll have everything you need to make that project. So there won't be anything you're missing, which is the good thing, right? Bad thing would be is if, there it is. So it's up on GitHub right now. So if I looked up on GitHub, I would pull this down now. If you were going to start from scratch, you've got all the assets. If you notice, here's the materials and models. And underneath imported assets, I've just given you something called FPS Effects. And so that includes a sample scene and some weapons and all kinds of other stuff, right? Okay, so that's the first thing. So what do I get with this package? Let me take a look. And like I said, I'll open up Unity again. So take a look again. I'm looking at the package on GitHub, Centennial College, FPS demo section 1 is what I'm looking at. But let me take a look at Unity for a second and see what our demo, FPS demo for section 1 looks like. Right. Okay, so now I've got these other stuff. So let's take a look and see if I was going to drag and drop some stuff in here, and I'm just going to, I'm going to pull in some other effects. One of them is going to be some kind of muzzle flash. So let's pull in the muzzle flash. I'm going to take this muzzle flash generic. That's what it looks like right here. And I'll just pull it into the scene. And here's a question for you. This generic flash, where do you think it should go? If I was going to pull the scene, should it just like hang out in the scene here? What do you think, Vanessa? What would you put the muzzle flash? Think about what it's called, muzzle flash, right? Where would you put it? Would you put it on? It would obviously go somewhere on the player. Would it go would be on the player camera, on the gun camera, on the rifle, on the sight? Where would it go? Where would the muzzle flash go? Could be on the rifle. Let's look and see what this muzzle flash looks like first of all. So if I was to play this muzzle flash, it looks like, well, it's gone, right? It was there and then it was gone. So let's take a look at that again. I'm just gonna hide it. I'm gonna kind of pause everything and then start playing, and let's see what it looks like here. So you don't see really a muzzle flash, and if I was to step up a little bit, I don't see it at all, right? So you don't see it because it's not in the scene. Like we started off kind of pointing down, right? So and if I was to kind of kind of step through the game, you can see that it doesn't really show the muzzle flash, right? But it actually does play an animation, right? This muzzle flash thing. But we need to put it in the scene. Okay, that's the first thing we have to do. So where is this thing? Well, first of all, let's see where the hell it is in the game, right? That's important. So I'm going to kind of press F, right? So I'm going to go to my scene view, press F, and the reason why we can't see it is because it's way over here, right? It's not even inside. It started off at 0, 0, 0, and you can't see it. So let's just move it up, right? And we'll just rotate the scene a little bit so we can put it in the scene so we can see it. I'm going to drop it down inside my scene, and I'm going to click on my rifle for a second, and I'm going to focus in on my rifle, and just kind of come up on the rifle, right, and then kind of come in from behind. So you can see this is the rifle. Let's see where the flash is, and it's way down here. That's not good. It's kind of probably somewhere in front of the rifle. In fact, let's straighten it up so it's right on top of the rifle. How do I do that? Well, first of all, my perspective, we should probably change this up. So let's go from perspective mode. If I click on this perspective mode, it turns into ortho mode, right? And I want to look at it from the top. So I'm going to look at top down. Here's my rifle. And I want to look at my muzzle flash. So I'm going to kind of pull out a little bit. Here it is. Here's my muzzle flash. I don't want it to be way out here. My muzzle flash should probably appear somewhere near my rifle, right? That makes sense. So I'm actually creating the spawn point for my muzzle flash. That's what I want to do. So I'm going to kind of move this in and zoom right into my rifle so I can see the rifle point, right? And click on my muzzle flash again, and then move that as close, the little point there, I want to move it as close to the muzzle. This is from top-down view only. We're going to still make some adjustments on the other side. Close to the muzzle as possible. That's the first thing I want to do. Okay, let's move to the side. So we're going to look at the side, and you can see that that's too low, so we move that up there like this. And again, in 3 dimensions, you got to make sure that where the muzzle flash should be is pretty much dead center in the rifle. Let's take a look at over here. Yeah, and then you can see this is where we're going to get some better centering. So I'm going to pull this up a little bit. And let's move that right in there so you can see the rifle. There's the face of the rifle, right? The rifle. And I'm going to kind of go back to here, and you can see that that's pretty good. That's like pretty much, you know, I've centered it so that the muzzle flash is right in the middle of the rifle. That's where it's going to go. That's the spawn point, right? And that's where I want my muzzle flash to be. To be honest with you, I probably want this thing to be, you know, again, either in the AK rifle or the gun camera. That's where I want it to be. And a gun camera is probably where I want it to sit because my gun camera is almost like my parent object for both my rifle and everything else. So let's do that. So let's parent the muzzle flash. Let's make the parent the gun camera. So I'm just going to move it over and then kind of do that. It doesn't change the position. We've already kind of done the position. And what it does is it just positions it relative to the camera. All right, so that's what my muzzle flash is going to be. All right, so let's play this thing now, and I'm just going to pull out, go into game mode, and then play for a second. I'll play it in pause mode and see what happens. Play. Okay, well, I don't see anything. I didn't see anything at all. So if I go here, there it is. See that? There's the gun. There's what it's going to look like. So this is what the kind of a preview of what the flash is going to look like. I'm going to have this, you know, happening, right? And if I press play again, you notice it's still playing the muzzle flash, but it's kind of ending off, right? So I can't have the muzzle flash play right away. That doesn't make any sense, right? But the muzzle flash would play. So if you look at the muzzle flash animation, if I click on this, muzzle flash generic, on the right, notice that this is a particle system. Now again, we said particle systems, I don't expect you to make them, but it's nice to know how to use them. One thing, if you notice on the right, is play on awake, right? We want to turn this piece off so it doesn't play on awake. Another couple of things that I kind of figured out that we don't need is this self-destruct script. I want you to remove it. So one thing we didn't do this morning's class that kind of messes us up later is remove the self-destruct script from the muzzle flash generic, right? So I'm just going to go here and just click on remove component. Right, there it is. So that's gone. So I don't care about that piece. All right, so my muzzle flash generic, it won't play automatically. It's there so I can reference it. It's an object that's inside my camera view. It's part of my gun camera, but it's not going to show until I call it into view. Okay. Second piece I need my impact. So let's go back into imported assets. I'm going to click on Fps Effects. I'm going to go to where it says particle systems. I'm going to click on impacts. When I click on impacts, I see there's a bunch of different impacts. One of the ones I like to use is concrete flex. So concrete flex. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to pull this concrete flex in, right, as an example. I'm going to put it underneath the gun camera. In this particular case, I'm just going to move it up. I don't care for it to be centered. It's never going to be, I don't need a spawn point for the concrete flex. It's going to happen when I call it into being. I'm going to instantiate these things, but I should make it so it's zeroed out. So the rotation and everything is zeroed. That's when I kind of click on this and say reset. So wherever the camera is, it's going to start off right in the middle. It's going to be there, but we won't be able to see it because I'm not going to play on awake. I'm going to turn this off. And there's also another script down here, self-destruct script. I'm going to remove that one too. So I'm going to kind of remove this component. Okay, cool. So I've kind of got my gun flex, my concrete flex, my AK rifle, all this stuff working out now. And you know what? It's time for some scripting. Right, so I want to make sure I can script this thing up. And just to make sure I play it, let's play this up. So make sure it's okay. We're good. So there's no effects happening right now. I can still move around. Right? So moving around, no problem. A bit of a head bob there and everything else. I can jump on the corner, look around, and all that kind of stuff. Right? So that's all good. That's the good stuff that we got in here. Okay, I need to add some scripting, and there's a couple things I need to do. One is when I want the first script I want to or modify is the main walk script. So I want to be able to click my fire button, and I click my right mouse button. So my left mouse button, my right mouse button, I want to click them, and I want to see my animation. All right. So in order for me to do that, I need to modify a script. What script do you think I should modify? Well, there's only one, player camera, on the player itself. So on the player itself, there's a script called first person controller script. So let's double click on that and bring it up in MonoDevelop, take a look at it. So there it is. And it'll come up in a second. There we go, MonoDevelop. And if you notice on this script, there's this new thing that we see here, and this is written by the fine people at Unity Technologies, right? You notice how the serialized field on the script enables us to see some fields like is walking and walk speed and run speed and all this kind of stuff. We can see these things on the inspector. Serialized field is the same as something like system.serialize. System.serialize allows us to see a class. Serialized field allows us to see a private field that's instead of a class in the inspector. All right, that's what it does, just as an update. Okay, cool. Here's a question. Here's some trivia for you. So we've talked about these different things we're making. These we've done meshes. We're going to instantiate this particle system. And what a particle system does, it's an emitter. That's what it does. It's an emitter. So it emits particles. There's two different kinds of particle systems that we're going to use, right? One of them is a particle system. We can always make this particle system a particle system that's a burst, just like this one here. This one here that we're doing, this impact, when it hits the wall or something, it's a burst of particles. There's another kind of particle system that's a continuous emitter, right? So like fire. If I had fire or smoke, that would be like an emission, right? It would continuously emit fire or smoke until the condition wore off and then there was no spark. But let's say we used up all the material for the fire or smoke, then it would turn off. Or maybe we have a predetermined time. The other way of doing a burst would be, of course, so gunfire is one, right? A burst. Some kind of muzzle flash, that's a burst, right? And there's lots of explosions, that's a burst. Now, speaking of explosions, before we do any more coding, I forgot to mention this. There's other stuff that's part of this little package I just gave you. One of them is explosion prefabs. Let me go into this for a second to show you. So if I go to Fps Effects, and if I kind of scroll down here into this section, whoop, what did I do? Hopefully nothing. That would really mess me up. What I want to do is I want to kind of open this up, and I want to show you the different particle systems and prefabs. So under prefabs, I have a barrel. Right? Look, I have some stuff here. So there's some barrels we're going to use, different kinds of barrels, and there's also a gun. We can use a gun. If you don't have a gun, you don't like the gun that I gave you, you can make your own. I also have some other props. I have a barrel prop, which is actually, I've got some textures, right, for the barrel, right? And there's also some different kinds of textures. I can apply different textures for the barrel, so that way in different bushes for different props and so on that I can use, right? So some really cool stuff. There's also a vase, right? Here's a vase, and some other things. And if you notice, they come with a couple of things, not just the actual the barrel itself, but this is a texture. And here's a question for you. See how it's looking like this? It's unwrapped, right? And it looks kind of like a realistic texture. This one is only the texture that goes around the barrel that makes it look kind of semi-realistic. One thing it doesn't have in this particular case is something called a bump map. Who remembers what a bump map is? Do you guys remember? We kind of talked about it last week. So you have a mesh, right? And let's just remind you guys from a studying perspective. And then what you have in the mesh, right? Around the mesh you have something that's shrink wrapped around the mesh called the material. The material that's around the mesh, shrink wrapped around the mesh, allows things for shaders, so how the shading looks, what kind of reflectivity it has, does it look metallic or not, does it have gravity, what kind of friction does it have, all kinds of stuff. The material determines almost like the effect of the object in the game world. How it looks, color, brightness, does it emit light, like all kinds of stuff. That's what a material can do. Another thing a material can have, another property a material can have is a texture. And the label texture sounds like it's something you can touch, right? Like a texture. It feels like there's something you can feel, right? Well, there is no texture. It's an image. In order for us to make it look like it's three-dimensional, the texture itself, we need to use something called a bump map. And what it does is if you were to take a picture of a wall, let's say right now, like you and I went outside, took a picture of the school wall, you would see light areas and dark areas according to my flash. There'd be areas that I would have some darkness and areas of lightness. What the computer can do, whether you're using Photoshop or even Unity, is it'll take those dark and light areas and create something called a bump map to make it realistic, right? And you can add that bump map alongside the texture on the material to give it a faux or fake three-dimensional feel and look to it, right? That's what it can be done. If you notice these ones, we don't have bump maps. All we have is these textures here. Now there's going to be some of them. I want to see if I can find some for you. Let's look at some of these things here. Here's some surfaces. Here's a brick. That's a brick surface. That's neat. Here's grass. And they've kind of given you some stuff, mud, sand. They've given you some default textures here that you can use. This is all in your FPS effects, by the way. Some surfaces you can use. There's also some special effects. Like, for example, there is some, if you look underneath here, under debris, there's glass, there's grass. So let me take a look at debris for a second. Open that up. Like, there's a lot of stuff that this package comes with. So there's bullet shells, and you see that there's a bullet shells as well as like pistol shells, right? And then plus the material that wraps around them. And that's the texture as well as the material, and that's how it wraps around the material, right? There's car parts, like you literally have car parts that make it look like a car, right? Like lying around, cardboard, and so on, right? And if you notice, there's the cardboard material, and there's different pieces of the cardboard, metal, stone, all kinds of stuff. There's also different explosions. Like you notice, there's an explosion. This is a little explosion sprite sheet that it has in there, so you can actually use this as an explosion. There's the explosive material, you know, and there's a different explosion for explosion number 2. There's tons of stuff in here. There's tons and tons of props and surfaces and everything. It's really a worthwhile download, this one here for you to grab, right? There's also decals, so if you want to do things like asphalt or blood, you know, there's some blood spatter, believe it or not. You can have that in there. There's bricks, so you can do combined bricks. Concrete of different kinds, right? So different concrete effects, right, for concrete. There's tons and tons of stuff here. There's also physics materials. So for brick, what brick was going to do from a dynamic friction and static friction perspective and everything. There's all kinds of stuff that this little package comes with, and that's why it's really cool to download and use it for your game. And again, you can use this one. The only thing I'd ask you not to use for your game is my maze. Make your own, right? If you're going to make a maze. Also comes with some example scripts. We're not going to use these, but it does come with them. And it also comes with some really cool sounds. So for example, we have an explosion sound. So let's take a look at the car explosion, right? So I'm going to see what that sounds like. That's the explosion, right, for the car. It also comes with some impacts. We're going to use these later on. So here's my concrete impact for the bullet sound, right? So it sounds like, it looks like a bullet sound. We also have some weapons. It comes with one MP7 weapon. And the good thing is it also comes with materials for the weapon. Now here's a normal map. Take a look at this. So I've got the weapon itself. It's hard to see, right? But this is the actual texture for the weapon that wraps the weapon. And then you have this almost like this purple color, which looks like a normal map. And what they've done is the computer's taken the light and dark areas of the weapon texture, and they've created a normal map. And you combine the normal map plus the texture to create this three-dimensional look and feel of the weapon. So it looks like it's got feel to it, like a texture to it, like bumps. And actually what they've done in practice is you can take a high poly model. We're going to talk about what high poly is. High poly versus low poly. So a high number of polygons in a model, right? You can take a snapshot of it, right? create a texture from it, and then a bump map, and then make the model low poly and apply the texture to it so that it looks like it's super, super detailed, but meanwhile it's a low poly texture. It's a technique that people use to reduce the amount of polygons and vertices and stuff because it can look really awesome, but it's basically you make a huge high poly texture first, you capture the image, there's a technique to do that, and then reduce it to low poly, but then you've already got the texture to wrap around it, yeah.
So doesn't that introduce a couple problems on the detail scale?
Some of it, but you know it's so close for you, and as you're moving along, like you know what I'm saying. I mean, remember games. It's all around tricks, right? Like I said before, it's all tricks and techniques. Like I like to call it smoke and mirrors to make it so it looks real, right? And that's what it does. You have these different textures. You have a regular texture, like an albedo texture, plus a bump map. There's also height maps. There's all kinds of stuff that you can do to make an object look more realistic with less, a small amount of vertices. And here's the MP7 object, right? That's what it does. There's also different physics materials, like I said, and other things. The ones we're interested in is, let's say, for example, if you look at the MP7, it also comes with a camera anchor, it comes with a muzzle flash, it comes with a muzzle light. It's really neat. Like there's all kinds of stuff that it comes with. Particle systems and materials. If I go to particle systems again, there's some explosions. Let's try an explosion and see what that looks like if I just pull an explosion into the scene. So let's take a regular explosion and pull it into the scene, right? There it is. And let's go to the left now and focus on that explosion. So I'll click, I'll go into the scene view and press F for focus, and I'll move back into a perspective mode. And let's look and see where that explosion is. It's not going to be something we can see. Right, so let's move that explosion into the scene so we can see. Notice there's a light that's accompanied by the explosion. Right, it's part of the explosion. It's a bundle. Right, so I'm going to make the explosion happen right there. So when I start my game, I want the explosion to happen. That's like kind of silly, but I want to be able to show it to you, and that's why I'm doing it this way. Right, so you can see what happens with the explosion. The explosion will be right in front of us. Right, let's move it a little bit in front of us more. Right, so there we go. So kind of in midair. Let's try it out and see what it looks like. So this is an explosion. So kind of boom, big explosion that happens. Right. That's a pretty good realistic explosion that's happening with particles, right? So we kind of go in there and then move in. There you go, the big explosion that's happening with particles. And it'll keep on going because it plays on awake, this explosion. And again, you can turn play on awake off. So you can only show an explosion when something is hit, right? And we'll talk about that next day. Not today, but tomorrow. So that's some of the stuff you do. And if you notice here in the particles, when I have, one of them is, the particle is this muzzle flash. Notice when I click away from it, right, to something else, like my AK rifle or my sight or maybe my explosion, notice that the muzzle flash effects that we saw earlier, it looks like these little shuriken, like ninja stars, right? That's what it looked like, right? So if I go to, again, if I click on my canvas, my explosion, and if I go back to, one of these, if I click on these, my muzzle flash, it's a particle effect, and it appears in the scene, right, as these little ninja stars, right? So if I go back out here and I kind of zoom out here and I move around the scene, if you look at the actual scene itself for this, it'll appear in the scene as these little ninja stars. And what that is it's called the shuriken particle system. That's the, or shuriken particle system, and it just shows you where the particle system is hanging out. Okay, cool. So that's what's kind of bundled with the program. I'm not going to use the explosion right now. I'm not going to use the barrels, but I could. Next day, what we're going to talk about is, or if it's not tomorrow, we may talk about it on next week. As we continue to do this FPS stuff, we'll talk about creating another kind of level, which is going to be more of a landscape with, for example, trees and grass, realistic trees and grass, and all that kind of stuff. We can grow out of our level and play in the game, which is kind of really cool. That's one thing we'll do. And we'll also do other things like add in some simple enemies that run after you. They kind of just chase in a certain direction. They have a certain pattern. But today what I want to do is I want to try and get as much of this game going so we can see some of this animation. So back into our script for a second. So we're back into our script, and if you notice, you're good? If you notice right now we have these private variables, and what I want to do is if I scroll down, I want to know where to put this stuff. And if you notice, there's fixed update, and there's also regular update. But down in here, if you notice, if I scroll down, there's going to be an area where there's something that's called get input. This get input method inside of our script is the place where we're going to use to modify our keystrokes. So when I press the right mouse button or the left mouse button, right, it plays the animation. Okay. So first of all, we have to know two things. If you were going to put in, typically when we hit the left mouse button, it would be like this: input dot get button, and then in quotations we put whatever the button is, fire 1, fire 2, or fire 3. How do I know that's what we put into the quotations? These enumerations. Well, if you go to edit, right, as an example, or sorry, right. If I go to, first of all, you got to go to Unity. And I go to edit, project settings, input. You notice that on the axis, I have a couple things here. Fire 1 is what the button is called. This is kind of a label for the first fire button. And if you notice, it's fire 1 or left control, right? Fire 1 or left control. That's what it is, right? And then the alt positive button is mouse 0, right? Mouse 0. So mouse 0 will be the left mouse button. And then if I look at fire 2, right? Fire 2 is, it's called fire 2. You can use the positive button as left alt for second fire button, right? And also the mouse button is mouse 1. Now you may not know what mouse 1 is, but it's the right mouse button. Fire 3 is the middle mouse button, the scroll bar, or the scroll ball, or the scroll wheel, or the middle mouse button. All right, and it's the reason why it's number 3 is it's not as commonly used as mouse 1 and mouse 2, right? So, or fire 1 and fire 2. So normally we would access them in a regular thing like this. It would be input dot get button, and then quotations, the name of the input. In this case, fire 1, fire 2. And if we wanted to use the get axis, we would say input.get axis horizontal or vertical. That's how we would move around, right? In this case, because we have our standard player controller, just to remind you guys, we installed this player controller as a standard player controller. Inside imported assets, if you notice, we have, so I'll move this a little bit closer, characters, and under characters, we have two characters. We have a first-person character and our third-person character. We didn't include him, right, in here. But our first-person character controller, we have some prefabs and scripts and everything else. That's what we use right now, and some physical materials and audio. But we could have chosen a third-person character. We didn't. We only chose a first-person character. Well, the first-person character, what it uses is a special controller that works cross-platform. And we can tell in the assets root, there's something called an editor folder that they've put in there. And under the editor folder, we have something called cross-platform input. And that's what we need to use when we access the buttons. Otherwise, our buttons won't work in this particular example because we're using their character controller, right? So the buttons for the mouse have to use cross-platform input. And if I go back to the to mono-develop, and if you notice here, I use cross-platform input manager .get axis in order for me to move up and down and so on to read the input. Okay, and again, this reads the input from the keyboard, right? But I also read the position of my mouse for mouse look, right? Because I have that mouse look script in here as well. Okay, so I want to put my stuff in here before this if statement, this mobile input kind of if statement. So I'm going to put it right in here. So let's type it in. So I'm going to say two things. I want to say if my my left mouse button or my right mouse button is clicked, right mouse button only, right? If my right mouse button is clicked, I want to play that animation. Well, hold on. That means that I got to think this through. I need access to the Animator Controller that's inside of my rifle, right? Because my rifle has the Animator Controller that moves the rifle from where the idle position is to the middle of my screen when I fire, right? That's what it does. That's what that Animator Controller does. So in order for me to use my rifle, I've got to make a reference to it. And so up at the top, if you notice there's some private variables here, I want to add a public variable before the private variables that I'm going to call animator or lowercase animator. So I'm going to say public, and it's going to be of type animator, and I want to call it animator. Okay, so right now it's nothing. I'm just going to convert this. It's nothing, it's just a reference to an animator. Well, I don't have a reference to an animator. Well, let's go get one. Right, so I'm going to go back. I'm going to click on the player object, right? And if you notice down here, I have my first-person controller, right? And in here is where I want a reference to the animator. There it is. There's my reference to the animator right down here. Well, I don't have a reference to the animator. Well, my animator is what? My AK rifle. So if I drag and drop my AK rifle into this slot, I'll have a reference to its animator. So that's what I want. So I'm going to drag it in there. Okay, so I've got my animator in here, right? And I've just dragged it from my AK rifle. Why was I able to drag my AK rifle to get an animator? Why didn't I have to go in there and click the animator and drag that in? Because it looks for it automatically. As long as I drop a game object that has an animator, it'll look for that piece, that component. If I'm looking for only an animator, that's the only component it'll take. Yeah.
So if you have two animators on the game object,
That's a problem. You'd have to make a reference manually to it, right?
So
You-
wouldn't let you test
No, it would take the first one, I think, is what it would do. And that's not good. You don't want unpredictable effects like that. You want only one animator, you know, on a game object or whatever that you want to drag and drop. Otherwise, you want to use a direct reference in script, right? Where you make get component, animator, you know, whatever the get component you're getting is, right? And you know, find by ID or tag name or whatever. Okay. So we've made a reference to the animator. This is good. This is the rifle animator. That's one. So that's one thing I need to make, and that's what this element does right here. So I have to make it public for it to be available in the inspector, so I can drag and drop on it and create a reference to that animator. Okay. And what this is the actual rifle animator. Okay. And if you want to, I can probably recode this so it says rifle animator, so we're clear. So if it's just so you don't know it's the player animator. It's not a player animator. It's a rifle animator. So let's just rename this thing. So I'm going to right-click, refactor, rename. We'll call this thing rifle animator. Rifle animator. Okay, cool. So just to make sure, because when we save, when we change this value, sometimes we lose the connection, right? So this is pretty cool, but notice how right now it's rifle animator changed, and I lost my reference. Let's drag and drop it again. So I'm going to take my AK rifle and drop it back in there. There we go, and I'm going to save. Okay, cool. So I've saved my rifle, reference to my rifle animator, and that's what this is. That's what this thing is. Okay, so now what I want to do is when I click my right mouse button, this is the pseudocode. So I click my right mouse button. I want to play my aim animation. That's what I want to do. So this is what I want to do. So play aim animation when right mouse button is clicked, right? That's what I want to do. Maybe clicked and held. How about that? So if you click and hold the right mouse button, it'll play the what you call that animation. Okay, that's what it does. So how do I do that? I have to say this. So if, and here we go. Now remember what I said. Cross-platform input manager, which is this one. Dot get button. And then in the thing, we want the right mouse button, which is fire to, right? Fire to, right? If that's the one that's triggering, then what do I want to say, right? I want, let's do a bit of a test first. So I'll say debug.log, you know, right mouse button clicked. Let's just check to see if it works first. Right mouse button clicked. Okay, because I think we need to know that it works first before I apply an animation. Okay, so that's the first step that I would do, right? And again, this is like line 213 of that first-person controller is where I'm going to put it. You should probably put it in the get input area for this right mouse button if you're going to put it as part of the player controller. Okay, so save it. I'm going to go back out here and I'm going to play. And if I've done everything correctly, then if I right-click, I get this right mouse button clicked event. And let's just stop and check my console, and you see that I clicked it and it clicked a bunch of times, right? Because as soon as I click, you know, it causes a bunch of events to fire. Okay, so that's neat to know too, because that means any click will be multiple clicks, not just one. All right, but it worked. It looks like it's responding to my clicks. That's the first thing, because you know some people, what they do, especially students or beginners, they try and make all these fancy effects work without even testing if the buttons are firing at all or triggering. First, you see that your buttons, whatever you want to do, are triggering. Are they triggering? Yes or no? Good. Now that we know they're triggering, Now you can do something else. Same thing with colliders, right? You want to set up all these colliders to get your score, right? If collider's not colliding, you're not going to get your score, right? So first check to see if the collider's colliding. If it's colliding and you're getting collider effects within your debug.log, you know it's going to, you can start calculating your score. Otherwise, no point. If it's not colliding, that's the first thing you need to check. Okay, let's go back to our script. So if you notice again, so I know this is good, so I can remove this debug.log. Now, what I want to do is I want to play my animation effect, right, from my animator. And I know if I go back to my my animator itself, it's called aim. Aim, and it's a Boolean. So I'm gonna set bool when I want to aim to true, and when I want to stop aiming, it's got to go to false. All right. So that's what it needs to say. Okay, so let's go back to our little log here. So I'm going to say one of these. I'm going to say, so when I press the right mouse button, as an example, get button, I'm going to say that this dot rifle animator, right, dot set bool, right, which I'm looking at the aim, the Boolean that's called aim, set it to true, right? That's the first thing. So I'm saying that. Set that Boolean to true when I'm playing, right? Else, and this is where it's better, else if I'm not pressing the button, set it to false. So when I'm holding the button down, it's going to play the animation. It's going to move me into that character animation. That's going to move me in that so the rifle is going to move from the resting position, the idle position, into the aim position. And when I let go of the button, it's going to move back, right? So let's try this out. So I'm going to say else. That's the quick way of doing it, and there's many ways we could code this one out. I'm just from a time perspective, I want to see if I can get it all done. So I'm going to say this dot rifle animator dot set bool, right? We're going to set it back the aim back to false. So we're going to say stop aiming when you're not pressing the button anymore. All right, let's test this out, see if it works. So I'm going to kind of save this, and I'm not printing out any debug log anymore. I'm going to run, and then in my animation, when I press right button, it moves in. Now I stop pressing, it goes out. Now my aimer is kind of poor, but that's okay. Don't worry about that. The point is it works. I can aim and it goes back. Aim and it goes back. So you actually have this right now. So my aim animation is done. All right. And this is a great place to stop. So I'm going to kind of stop this out, move this in, and I'm going to say I've added my aim animation to my script. Right. And that's what I'm doing. So I'm going to file, save my scene. I'm going to file, save my project, and then I'm going to file or Unity quit. And now I'm going to go into my terminal here. I'm going to say git add dot git commit -m, and I'll say enabled, aim animation with left click or right click. Git push origin master, right? So a few changes, and now you should have that animation. That whole piece is there for you in this commit. So let's take 10 minutes. We'll take a bit of a break, and when we come back, I'll try and do the rest of the animation and plus the bullet fire stuff if I can get it in. It's a bit of typing, but if I can get it in, we can get most of it done by the end of the night. We have an hour. We're a little bit ahead of where we were this morning with some of the stuff that I struggled through. All right. And by the way, last day, just to end off, one thing that I did change, because when I showed you guys the video from last day, we had a problem with our shader. I just want to show you that one thing to finish off. So if I was to bring this up for a second. So let's just before we end, I'll go to Unity, and I'll bring up FPS Demo Section 1. One thing we had a problem was with our shader for our the models. Again, we have our scene, which is our main scene, our scripts, which is, we don't have any scripts yet of our own. We have some animations, or clips and controllers, and we have a model, we have some rifles and everything else for our models, and some prefabs, a maze tile and a player. And inside of our player prefab, what I've done is I've got a sight, a gun sight, this right here. And one of the things you need to make for the gun sight is you got to turn shadows off and receive shadows on, shadows off as well. But the other thing you need to do is on the shader, right, for the gun sight itself, right, because this is a material, the quad itself for the material, you've got to make sure that the material is unlit transparent. If you notice the shader here for the material, it's got to be of type unlit transparent. Otherwise, there'll be a shine around the gun sight, which is ridiculous, right? And that's why we were getting that weird shine last week. We couldn't get rid of it because it was the wrong type of the shader. I was using a standard shader with specular setup, and what I want to use is unlit transparent. And unlit transparent, what it does, it doesn't. You can look through it, and there's no lighting effects. There's no reflection or anything like that. So that's what takes care of that. Okay, so let's stop recording here, and we'll come back in a few minutes.